back to Storytime with Dave Booker. Today we're going to continue on. In fact, we're going to finish Sheriff in a Small Town. So we're almost done. We've got about 3 chapters left. They're very short chapters, no more than about 4 pages each. So we're going to finish this up today. And you will have had the entire book. So I'd still like you to go out and buy it, but I want you to hear what it's like. So we're going to start with changes. Rocky was sitting behind the sheriff's desk and checking out the computer for anything they ought to be aware of. Morgan was on vacation for a few days and he wanted Rocky to feel what it was like to be sheriff. And Rocky had immediately registered his name at the county courthouse. So far he was running unopposed. The long hours and the prevalence of working weekends didn't appeal to most people. There was talk in town that Roger Corman wanted to run. He was a builder who had been trying to purchase a field down near where the jail used to be. Town wasn't about to sell, as there was a cemetery there as well, and as the fact that it was used for all the sport games. Every now and then, Mac Barker, who ran the sporting goods store, would hold a fishing tournament and fish fry. Agnes was usually among the contestants and had won twice. Rocky was surprised when Mr. Corman barged into the office and slammed his hand down on the desk. "Deputy, race for sheriff. I've put my name on and I aim to win." Rocky looked Mr. Corman over and leaned back in his chair. The man's overbearing manner didn't faze him. If anything, he found it humorous. "Good luck with that." Up the paper he had laid down and began to write on it. Mr. Corman was not a man to accept being ignored and tore the paper from Rocky's hand. "You don't get it, do you? I'm not asking, I'm telling you to drop out." Rocky retrieved the paper and pointed towards the door. "Well, I'm running, and if you want to run too, that's fine, but you won't win by threatening me." Mr. Corman kicked the desk and stormed out. Rocky laid down the paper and tried to figure out why Corman wanted to be the sheriff. It was the long hours and occasionally dangerous. Corman wanted the position. It had to be about something out of the ordinary. There wasn't any glamour about the job. It didn't pay enough for the money he'd be losing on his business. Sheriff Morgan came in looking back over his shoulder. "What did Corman want? He looks brassed off about something." Rocky chuckled. "He wants me to drop out, but I can't imagine why he'd want to be sheriff." Morgan stroked his beard as he gave that some thought. "Give me a second." He picked up the phone to call the Civic Council President, Matt Johnson. "Hey, Matt, sorry to bother you, but do you have anything going through at the council that involves Corman?" There was a pause while Morgan listened. "Yeah, I thought it was something like that. Half and half, huh? When would you be calling me in?" "Oh, he wants to wait till after the election. I see. You know he's running for sheriff, don't you?" "Oh, he just told my deputy." "Yep. He wants to be the tiebreaker." "Well, of course I know we've got to remain impartial. There's a finger in the pie. He's going to be awful hard for him not to pull things his way. He's got his men on the council, and he'll have the tie-breaking authority." "Okay, let me know what you decide." He placed the phone on the receiver gently, but the look on his face told Rocky he'd rather have slammed it. "Did you get the gist of what I was talking to Johnson about?" Rocky nodded. "He wants to push some land his way." Morgan nodded. "Yep. He's got half the council in his pocket. He pays him a pretty good bonus to vote things the way he wants. The rest of the council's honest, so I usually end up breaking the tie. It's part of the charter that the sheriff is the tiebreaker." Rocky thumbed through the charter and read the passage. "Well, it says here the sheriff can't be on the council, though." Morgan pulled out a register for the election. "He's running for president of the council. The president is considered over it and not on it." Rocky shook his head. "Next thing you know, he'll have the council members to his cronies if he gets elected." Morgan agreed. "Pretty sure that's his intention, but if you check, you'd see it can't be done. President is just there to make sure things run smooth. If I know Corman, he's going to focus on being sheriff. Some money around or threaten people to get the votes. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the computer desk. After a moment's thought, he turned to Rocky. Rocky, how would you handle the council meetings? Well, how do you mean? Well, there are usually things that come close to or pretty close to a tie, especially when Corman's concerned. I'd see if some compromise could be found. That's probably what the current president has been doing if they haven't been contacting you. If they've been contacting you, I haven't heard about it. Morgan paced around for a while before returning to the desk and leaning heavily on it. He hasn't. He's a good man, but weak and leans along with Corman's group. Corman has been running roughshod on the town, and I'm fed up with it. I want you to go easy on running for sheriff and heavy on the council side. Rocky, see, Pop, are you serious? Morgan laughed at Rocky's slip. He sat down opposite and spilled out his scheme. Look, Rocky, here's how he's going to run heavy on the sheriff's side because he thinks he can count on his people to weigh the scales in favor of a tie. You, with your ability to talk people, can smooth discussions over and find compromises. That means that nothing from the council comes into the sheriff. He won't get everything he wants, but we can feed him enough he doesn't get sore. In the meantime, he'll have to do the sheriff's job. He'll have to do it right, or they'll come down hard on him. We answer to the people here, and if they don't like the way he's doing things, they can kick him out and slide someone in they trust. Now, let's say he screws the job up and they kick him out and come to you to take over again. Rocky considered and shrugged. Well, I can appoint an intern for a while, causes things to be uneven in favor of one side. Someone from the Corman's group and make him or her president. They don't have a vote and are just regulators. Board slapped him on the shoulder. Now that's thinking, son. Going whole hog on the sheriff position. He stumped all over town complaining that Morgan wasn't running and Rocky was a cocky fresh down at the first crime if Morgan wasn't there to back him. He talked recent surge in crime, which Morgan and Rocky had kept on top of, and how it looked like the deputy might be in on the take. He slandered Morgan and Rocky every which way he could think of. He tried to show the town as Sodom and Gomorrah, said how the sheriff's office wasn't doing anything about it. In the background. Rocky is more subtle but effective, but stated his case at the different meetings around. His record and demeanor were his best assets. He didn't cajole and he wasn't a rabble-rouser, he just talked. And he used. In a town like this, if you grew up there, you had a lead from out of town. Had gone all out. His run for one for the bucks. He had ads in the paper, he spent money like water to everyone. He was making it back with all the business he could steer his way. That evening, as the Rocky were situated at the back of the high school gym. Between them, the council president. When the voting was tallied, they filled out the form and walked it over. Council President Johnson rose and opened the envelope. Clearing his throat, he tapped on the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, for our Council President, Rocky Stone. There was a few cheers and plenty of clapping. Rocky acknowledged the applause with a gracious smile and bowed. For Sheriff, he paused for dramatic effect, Roger Corman. There was a smattering of applause and someone whistled. Corman rose and clasped his hands above his head. He stomped his feet and howled. Should have taken a week or more for the turnover, but Sheriff Corman kicked Rocky out of his office the next day. He strutted around town with his chest stuck out so far that the star lay flat, pointing out. Rocky and the council president spent a few days going over procedures, who was on what committee, what they reported on and to who, and when would the mayor show up and what she was interested in. Rocky took the reports home and annotated which ones Corman would have an interest in. From the looks of things, he wanted to buy up plenty of the parks and fields. He was trying to get the lake area designated as commercial instead of public use. Agnes went over his notes and started giggling, which developed into a full belly laugh that had her in tears. Rocky was working out compromises that would give the bare minimum to Corman in such a way that his people what he wanted, just not the way that it would benefit him. He used regulations and zoning to assist his decisions. Checking on the council charter, he found another way to keep things honest. He's going to send the records to the Sentinel, with who voted which way on what. This way, they would be honest to a point. This was supposed to happen after every meeting, but it stopped. All Rocky was doing was reinstituting a procedure that had already been ignored. Excuse me. The first meeting of the council with Rocky in charge was. He explained that all the rules designated in the charter were to be complied with, that all votes would be registered, and that the issues in question would be sent to the Sentinel and published as per agreed on in the orders. The concerned murmurings from the Corman side made Rocky hide a smile. They couldn't be as one-sided if it was being publicized. Rocky banged his gavel and began the meeting. Issue 1 is the conversion of a portion of the lake property from community property to commercial. I see that 60% is attached to the homeowners. Another 20% is park and was deeded 45 to the city under the understanding that it remains so until the year 2045. This was done at the behest of Ken Dobson, who willed this portion to the village. Rocky had spent the better part of a morning researching that piece of information. Let's see now, 15% due to safety regulations around the dock is not convertible, and 3% is allocated with underground electricity. This leaves the triangle section between the parking lot and the maintenance shed available for conversion. It was a section of grass 5 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet. All in favor of converting this portion for commercial use, say aye. One of the people who Corman had under his thumb slammed his fist on it. A possible commercial enterprise could be placed in this space. Rocky's suggestion of received with laughter. The motion was passed and the location was posted for a commercial enterprise to bid on it. Several other motions were voted on with similar results. Rocky had studied each item thoroughly and his findings were. Since the findings were to be made public, the Corman contingent were unwilling to force the issues as they had before. The first weekly meeting passed with no ties to pass on to the sheriff. Corman was having a hard time understanding the rules and regulations the sheriff operated under. He also couldn't cope with the fact that people treated the sheriff's office as a place to hang out and talk. People came to the office for advice and seeking information on ordinances. When he kept the door locked and windows shuttered, people began to wonder what he was doing. Then there were the many demands outside the regular tasks that he found the village expected of him. At the Sunday social, he would call the races, judge the pies, officiated at the softball game, and directed traffic when everyone departed. He was expected to be on the choir, as to be available to marry people when they couldn't do it at the church. He was becoming frustrated that people expected him to be on duty well past the 8 hours he normally did before. Made for a very grumpy sheriff, stomping or driving around. The council was becoming productive and the people were enjoying the improvements. Recommendations were coming in thick and fast. What the people liked best was that if an item was turned down or adjusted, there was always an explanation. People knew what was happening and why or why not. Rocky's above-board approach was appreciated and acknowledged. often in letters to the editor of the Sentinel. The letters regarding the new elected sheriff were not so complimentary. Sheriff Corman was angry. He had not only worked hard to get this position, but had spent a considerable sum of money only so he could act as a tiebreaker. Now there weren't any ties to break. He had tried to get the lakefront property to build on, and the plot they converted was too small for anything he had in mind. The bid had been won by a young man who bought an ice cream cart for the summer and a roasted chestnut hot drinks cart for winter. He was doing well with it and thinking about opening an ice cream place in town. Corman was looking through the regs and town chart to see if there was anything he could do to take Rocky out of the picture. He considered drumming up a charge. If he was in jail every time they voted, it might improve the chances. The more he thought about it, the more he considered it a good idea. Thursday next, he wrote his hand expectantly, is going to be interesting. The only problem he was finding was a reasonable charge to lock Rocky away with. He had a reputation for integrity, which made trumping up a charge that would stick difficult. Still, he could make a mistake, hold him until the meeting was over, then realize his mistake and set him free. The charge he chose was vagrancy, the crime wandering a public street without a purpose. He expected Rocky to make a fuss, considering he used to be a deputy and knew all the laws. Then he could charge him with the more serious charge of resisting arrest. Rocky submitted peaceably, figuring correctly that if he fought, Corman would be able to trump up the bigger charge. Corman locked him up, and to his surprise, Rocky laid down and went to sleep. He kept a close watch on the clock, and when the meeting was over, he called one of the people he had on the council for a report. Had the sheriff checked the record, he would have seen that nothing important was being discussed or voted on. The meeting went smoothly, even without a president, and they adjourned early. Val Lawrence submitted the report to the Sentinel and went home. Rocky was woken by the sound of Sheriff Corman kicking his desk. "What's wrong, Sheriff?" Corman cursed and limped over to the cell. Taking the key from his belt, he apologized. "Sorry for locking you up. I guess I had the wrong person. Someone called in about a vagrant, and you were the only one out there." Rocky thanked Corman for his hospitality and stretched, remarking that a peaceful rest he had. As the door closed behind him, he paused. The sound of a man kicking his desk could be heard halfway down the block. The next week was due to be more important. Several of the plots Corman was interested in were coming up for a vote. He wanted to open a motel in the plot near the old jail and was determined that the field be practically given to him. There were plenty of parking lots that people could use for the sports, and open field was just a waste of space as far as he was concerned. Once more, Rocky was arrested, this time on a charge of interfering with an officer. Corman was walking up the street, and as Rocky came the other way, Corman bumped into Rocky and claimed Rocky was trying to prevent him from doing his job and jailed him. Rocky again submitted quietly, which angered Corman. He expected some resistance and planned on using that to his advantage. Being particularly rough in his treatment as they walked to the office. He tripped Rocky, pushed him, stepped on his heel, all of which Rocky apologized for as if he had somehow been in the wrong. Because Corman was so open in his treatment of Rocky, people started to take notice. I'll stop by the jail to talk to Rocky. "I thought I'd find you here," he chuckled. "I'll be taking your place today and was wondering if you had your notes for the meeting." "Well, they're on the podium. I dropped them off early." Val headed out, giving a nod to the sheriff as he left. Val was one on Corman's payroll. Corman lay back in his chair and puffed on a cigar. Things were going to work out better this time. In half an hour, Val was back at the sheriff's office. "We had to cancel the meeting. We didn't have enough for a quorum." "Hell, did you call everybody?" Sheriff Corman barked. "There wasn't anyone at home, probably over at the bar for the fish fry." Rocky was summarily dismissed. He was pushed out the door. Rocky sat on the bench and listened to Corman pounding on his desk and kicking the wastebasket around. To Rocky, it was like sweet music. The next morning was set up, and Corman called each of his people to ensure that they would be there. He was so determined and mad that his plan always failed that he picked Rocky up from his home and dragged him to the squad car. Agnes made some calls and set the great siren blaring. He was met by a fair-sized portion of the town. People demanded to know what Rocky was charged with. Avoiding their questions, he dragged Rocky out from the car. The sight of Rocky with dirt marks on his shirt and pants and torn clothing made them more determined to know the charge. Sheriff Corman pulled his gun and threatened to lock them all up if they arm and applied pressure to make him drop it. Due to the large crowd, the council recessed and joined the throng. Sight and sound made their impression. They drove back into the chamber for the voting. Indignation was so strong that even Corman's stalwart cronies vetoed his acquisition of the park. Val himself brought the notice to the sheriff. Sheriff Corman was called to a meeting at the high school gym the following day. He came in full uniform and armed. He had a good idea what was going on and wasn't going to relinquish his position without a fight. He was seated at the table in front next to Rocky. There was no discussion as to why. An article in the Sentinel laid out the case pretty clearly. All in favor of removing the sheriff, say aye. A loud chorus of ayes echoed up in the hall. All hands were raised in affirmation, so that there was no need to vote on keeping him. The sheriff was out. Corman's face turned red and he leapt from his seat, drawing his gun as he rose. Rocky had been expecting. His anger was greater than his pain, and he swept the gun to aim at Rocky. He never got the arm higher than his hip. Rocky had his on his gun. Rocky had his hand on the gun with the thumb under the hammer. He squeezed, using every bit of his considerable strength on the nerve to Corman's hand. His fingers flew open and the gun dropped, landing on the foot he had shot. Val pinned Corman's hands behind him as another person at the desk pulled the cuffs and slapped them on Corman's wrists. Major Shirley Thompson took the badge off his shirt, placing it on Rocky's chest. She asked him to escort Corman to the cell and book him. She turned to Val. You're president of the council, and I plan on having my secretary there for all meetings to record motions and votes. That will leave you free to focus. She shook his hand and then followed Rocky and Corman out. The meeting adjourned to thunderous applause. All right, we're doing the last chapter here, Festivities. Morgan dropped by his old home early for breakfast. Abby sat him down and poured him a cup of coffee. He was surprised that they hadn't changed much. Kind of expected that things would have been more up to date. Thought maybe because Agnes had lived here that she might be against changing things. A few of Rocky's personal items had been added, but that was all. Rocky came in bleary-eyed and looking a little worse for wear. Morgan, having been in his position, understood that Rocky had been pulling this long shifts and hadn't gotten any time off since returning to the sheriff's office. Placing the breakfast in front of them, she filled Rocky's thermos with the rest of the coffee. Paper sack stood on the counter ready for deployment. Morgan looked fondly on his son-in-law. Conscientious to a fault, he had returned ready to tackle the job with his old vigor, and it was killing him. Son, you've got to take some off time. Things are slow, which seems like they are. You don't need to be there for such a long time. Rocky ruffled his hair and drained his coffee in one go. Agnes was ready with a refill and sat down next to him. She ate one-handed since the other was gripping Rocky's under the table. Though concerned, she didn't say anything. She hoped her father could talk sense into him and make him take it easier. Look, why don't you talk to Talbot about coming in as your deputy? He did a damn fine job that time. I did, Pops, but he's busy at the station, doesn't want to let Joe down. I'll find someone. I know I need a break, but people voted me back and I don't want to let them down. Excuse me. Morgan understood. He did the same when he had to return full-time. Rocky got up, checked himself in the hall mirror, and kissed Agnes goodbye. He had left a bit early, as walking to work allowed him to exercise and wake up before he got there. Passing Joe's shop, he waved and continued walking. Joe came out and asked if he could walk with him. Walking in silence, the two men communicated without saying a word. At the office, Rocky sat at the desk and pulled the sheets from the fax. Joe made coffee and, when done, helped himself to a cup. He sat down opposite Rocky and looked worriedly at his friend. Today was a fortunate day for do me a favor. Rocky poured out some coffee from the thermos and intimated that he was ready to do what he could. Could you possibly take on Talbot as a deputy again? Joe looked almost sheepish, which in a husky guy was funny. Rocky perked up. Yeah, easy as you please, but won't that short you some? Morgan drained his coffee and sat poking holes in the cup with the pen. I got word from my cousin that he's out of work and asked if I could find him a job. He's a good mechanic, maybe almost as good as Talbot. I don't want to lose him, but he's not only a great mechanic, but a good friend. And you've got to take care of family, though. If you ask him to come work with you, I know he'd be eager to. Rocky put a call through to the shop and asked Talbot to stop by at the diner. Walking to the diner, Rocky bought breakfast for them and sank comfortably into the booth. Talbot was confused why he had been invited to breakfast. Maybe I'm going to be fired. This is to soften the blow, he thought nervously. After the food arrived, Rocky began the conversation, asking questions about the shop and about how Talbot was doing and if he was tired of it. He was becoming more convinced by the second he was about to be fired, and Joe was using Rocky so he wouldn't be the villain. Rocky saw Talbot was becoming more and more concerned and figured it was time to come to the point. Talbot, you did a darn good job working with Morgan. I was wondering if you could possibly come work with me. I'm beat and need some help I can count on. Talbot was so startled at the offer he spilled his coffee. He didn't need to say a thing. The look on his face did all talking for him. Just as suddenly, though, his face collapsed. He turned to Joe. I think I'll stay with Joe here. I owe him. Joe shook his head. You don't owe me a darn thing. You've helped me bring the garage up to scratch, and it's doing fantastic. He held out his hand. You're also a damn good friend. He took out a letter. See here? My cousin is coming to stay with me for a while, and he's asked me to help him get started again. He's fallen on some hard times, so if you take the deputy job, I can offer him a place in the shop. Granted, he's nowhere near as good as you, but I'll be helping family, and you'll be doing a job that can offer you more than I can. I'd try to give him the deputy position, but it wouldn't be good for him or the town. Talbot eagerly took the deputy position, but no damage to anyone. Rocky and Talbot were doing a walk around town. It felt good to be out and about in the warm sun and cooling breezes. Things were quiet with two vigilant lawmen on duty. Rocky was leading them towards the old jail. As the town's historical society building, it looked imposing. On the spur of the moment, they entered to look it over. Rocky was just coming out. His eyes were red, but Joe was just coming out. His eyes were red, but it seemed he wasn't upset. The look on his face was one of pride. At the sight of Rocky, he took him by the arm and led him to the exhibit regarding the building's history. On the wall were various pictures, but one section was partitioned off. The bold lettering on the top said, "Acquitted." Below was a story of how a reporter believed in the innocence of a condemned man and how the truth was brought to light, resulting in the right person incarcerated and the wrong man's name cleared. A further list accompanied all of the good the sheriff's office had done for the community, starting with Sheriff Wilbur Longarm Leonard through Sheriff Marvin Morgan and his long list of accomplishments, some of which were unknown to Rocky. Talbot was reading over Morgan's list. Damn, Rocky, we got some awful big boots to fill. Rocky nudged him and pointed out where their own list had begun. Talbot punched Rocky on the arm and grinned. It's always nice to be acknowledged. Outside again, they headed to the hot dog hut for a bite. The day was too nice to be indoors, so they walked to the field and sat in the long grass. Around them, an unaccustomed bustle of activity as the setup for Founders Day was underway. Every inch of the field was to be used. An area was set up for the 50-yard and 100-yard dash. Ferris wheel was in the center, and a merry-go-round was being hauled in and placed nearby. Talbot was thrilled. I've never been to anything like this. It's almost like what I imagined county fair is like. Rocky had to laugh at the eagerness in Talbot's face. The look might have belonged to a little kid. Well, we'll be here again tomorrow, along with pretty much everybody. We'll be doing a bit of calling for the races and a few other things, keeping an eye out for trouble, and maybe participating in some of the events. You ever done a three-legged or a sack race? When Talbot acknowledged that he hadn't, Joe leapt up and, removing his belt, had Joe stand near him. Strapping one leg each together, Rocky had them race to the tree and back again. It was clear Talbot wasn't going to be ready to run a three-legged race. He couldn't keep pace and had them doing donuts in the grass. Talbot looked around again and spotted a dunk tank. Tell you what, Sheriff, if you and someone else can beat me and Joe, you have to go in the dunk tank, and you have to stay in the dunk tank until I knock you in. Rocky nodded. And if I win? Well, then I go in, and I give you 3 strikes to hit the bullseye. They shook it through, though Rocky guessed Joe and Talbot's performance had been a setup for this bet. The day for the festival must have had the city councilmen walking on air. Rocky and Agnes picked up Joe, Talbot, and Michaela in the Rocky's truck. Joe was in such a high good humor, he had his head out the window and barked at people as they drove past. The sky was perfect, and several kids were already flying kites to see who could go the highest. The festival was crowded by 800, and everyone was having a grand time. Talbot really hadn't ever been to a festival before, but Michaela had, and they wandered off to explore. Rocky called some races, then passed the megaphone to a passing youngster so he could run with Morgan. Joe and Talbot were more in sync today, and it was a close race. At the line, Joe and Talbot took a diving finish to end first. Morgan was definitely not going to dive in. At the dunk tank, Rocky mounted the seat, relieving the unfortunate who had volunteered. Rocky was blindfolded and waited for the plunge. From the sounds around him, it seemed a lot of people had gathered to watch the sheriff get dunked. The crowd quieted, and Rocky braced himself. There was a whoosh as the ball hurled to the target, and a loud clang as it hit the mark, and a cool breeze as Rocky fell into the 5 feet of cold water. Taking off the blindfold, he saw that Talbot was not the one who threw it. It was Agnes who had sent him plunging. Rocky was climbing out when Talbot reminded him that he had to wait until he threw his ball. Talbot lined up everyone around, then got into line at the end. Agnes ran and got a towel and a blanket and sat on the ground and waited. This might take a while. After his continual submersion, he eventually left the tank after and only after Talbot's throw. Agnes drove him home to change, get warm, and cheer up. By the time they returned, Rocky was ready for anything again. Dressed in his uniform, he called Talbot over for a photo. He had them mount on the merry-go-round horses and act as if they were chasing a gang of desperados. For weapons, they were holding squirt guns, which they shot at other people on the ride. At a back corner, a hot air balloon was resting. For $2, the operator would take you up 100 feet. Joe, Michaela, Talbot, and Agnes and Rocky all paid $2 fare. Standing by the edge, they watched the world fall away as they drifted up. At the rope's extension, they paused and looked around. Rocky and Talbot saw the vastness of their jurisdiction laid out beneath them. Talbot nudged Rocky. To serve and protect, huh, pal? Rocky nodded in awe at the privilege of their being responsible for the peace and security of so much and so many. As they descended, Rocky felt a renewed devotion to this town and to his deputy. He was no Morgan, and the townsfolk knew it, but they liked and accepted him. Placing an arm around Agnes, he was glad to be part of this place, and he had always called home. Stopping at the food booth, they gorged on sloppy joes, lemonade, and funnel cakes. Agnes placed the blanket over Rocky like a bib so he didn't drip on his uniform. People walked by and snickered as she tied a corner around his neck. "Darn it, Agnes, I'll just eat it with a fork, okay?" She untied it, and if it dripped, it dripped. As they partook of all the booths and amusements, the day winged past. Rocky had left a few times during the day to perform sorties in town, just on the off chance that somebody tried to take advantage of the town's closing. Talbot may have been off duty, but that didn't stop him from keeping a watchful eye on the festivities. One thing that amused Rocky was seeing one of the reporters from the Sentinel taking pictures both from the Ferris wheel and the hot air balloon. He looked a little green coming off the balloon. He wondered if in an offhand way if there would be a picture of himself emerging from the dunk tank. As dusk descended, everyone went and got blankets and sweaters. The evening was getting chilly, and vendors and coffee were doing a brisk business. Michaela was laying on Talbot's lap and doing her best to stay awake. Joe was on a blanket near them, stretching out and snoring. Agnes was sitting on Rocky's lap as he braided her hair. He was plaiting straw and long grass, and the braids for color. Morgan was nearby humming to himself and enjoying being part of the scene. The band began playing softly, and a couple of fireworks went off. Practice over, they broke into the 1812 overture as fireworks accented the performance. When the time came for the cannon, it came from behind Rocky. He hadn't seen them bring them up, and they belched smoke with each firing. Joe woke with a startled snort, and Michaela hopped into Talbot's lap, holding him close. The finale, when they let the rest of the fireworks, was a wonder. The night sky was full of sparkling flashes, and the few clouds reflected the changing colors. After the finale, people rushed to their cars to beat the coming traffic jam. 6 members of the council had volunteered to direct traffic, and Rocky mentioned that they did a respectable job. Talbot offered to take the night shift since Rocky had been doing it so often, and his offer was gratefully accepted. When most everyone had cleared, Rocky, Agnes, and their friends took their departure. He wanted to get home and rest. Tomorrow promised to be an interesting day. He just didn't know it yet. And that is the last page of Sheriff in a Small Town. Remember, you can pick this up this week this month of July 2024, and it is on sale for quite a bit off. So get them now while they're cheap. I am looking for ideas of what to read next. So if you look through my list of books on Amazon and on Smashwords, you can find them. Let me know what you'd like to hear. If you are an author and you'd like me to read your books on here, let me know that too. Be more than happy. I've done several. I've been fortunate to do several and have had a blast doing them. So I look forward to hearing from you. Have a good day, and you take it easy. Take care of yourself. And I'm going to get this. It's not shutting down.